It is wrong! It is wrong! Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Sarek, which is episode 23 of season 3 of Star Trek The Next Generation. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation, one episode at a time. In this video I cover the episode Sarek. So Sarek is the episode where Sarek comes aboard the Enterprise for one last hurrah, a great mission to negotiate relations between the Federation and this very sort of isolationist, hard to obtain species, and it's said to be his crowning achievement. However, while he's on board, people start randomly yelling at each other, being angry and attacking each other, so random acts of violence happen all throughout the ship, and Beverly Crusher determines that this is happening due to Sarek's decline, that he has a disease known as Bendai syndrome, which is causing him to lose control over his emotional restraints, and that he is projecting telepathically his feelings of anger on the rest of the crew. He and his party deny this vehemently until Picard tricks him into having a very emotional outburst, and then it becomes apparent that he's in no condition to do these negotiations. However, this alien race refused to speak with anyone other than Sarek, so a solution is devised where Picard will mind meld with Sarek, and where Sarek will gain Picard's strength and control, and just for long enough to conduct the negotiations, whereas Picard gains the uncontrolled, powerful emotions of Sarek that control him. However, after it's done, everything returns to normal. The negotiations are a success, and Sarek leaves on his merry way, Picard now having a much better understanding of the man. So, let me start by being honest. If I can be honest, is it okay? Can I be honest with you? Of course, I'm always honest in my reviews, but let me ask permission. Can I be honest? Let me be honest with you. I think this episode's overrated. I always felt that way. Now, granted, as when I watched this episode just now, I did appreciate it a lot more than I ever did before, and I can see what they were going for, and I could see how it did make a sort of strong analogy to Alzheimer's. I guess I never really connected with it before because I never personally, at least not yet anyway, personally had to deal with anyone close to my life having to go through that sort of decline, but I could imagine how mortifying and difficult it would be to witness that, especially in someone you really admire. So I can imagine that. I just never connected with me before. I just never really gave it much thought, I suppose. However, all that being said, I still think this episode's overrated. I'm sorry. I do apologize, but I really don't think it's... I do think whenever you have a cameo from an original series episode, especially when it's a crossover type episode, they tend to be overrated. People tend to be like, oh, it's the character that I know from the original series. Or how does the pitch beating guy say it? Hey, that's the character from the other show. So I think, yeah, whenever there's a crossover character from the original series, people tend to go nutty over it and overrate it, in my humble opinion. I think, and I'm pretty positive, and I'm pretty strong in my belief that had this been an original Vulcan character, like a one-off guest star that we'd never heard of before, this episode would not be as well liked. And I am sticking to that 1,000%. And the funny thing, though, because that was actually a strong possibility, because Roddenberry at this stage was still very reluctant to tie this to the original series. And so he had the scriptwriter write 2 versions of this episode, one with Sarek and one with a generic Vulcan. In the end, they did convince him to go with Sarek because he's like, all right, Next Generation's been on for, this is its 3rd year, and it's been pretty, independent, and it's sort of proved itself separate from the original series enough that, we'll go ahead and allow Sarek. But the funny thing is that they were being very weird about this, and I remember in the Blu-ray commentary, bonus features, it has an interview with Ira Stephen Bear, and he's talking about how him and Ronald D. Moore, who did an uncredited rewrite on the episode, wanted to mention Spock because, to coin a phrase, it seemed only logical. Particularly in the scene with Picard, where Picard was letting loose all these emotions, that he should mention Spock, and apparently he got a firm no, you are forbidden from doing so, by Rick Berman and Gene Roddenberry, who says we do not mention characters from the original series. And I would be like, I got a question. This episode is about a character from the original series, so why would you not mention another character from the original series? That makes 0 sense. And apparently Ira Stephen Bear thought the same thing and kept bugging Rick Berman about this, but Rick Berman, like in anger, was like, no, this is the final word. I said no. And then so Ira Stephen Bear dropped it, and they were working on another episode, and apparently they were getting along great. They were hamming out this episode, and they were having a good time and bonding, and then Ira Stephen Bear just quietly slips in, so tell me again why we can't have Sarek mention Spock. And then Rick Berman's just, fine, you can do it once, just say his name once, that's it. And so that's what they got away with, and that's why in the scene where Picard is flipping out with his mind meld with Sarek, he says the name Spock. Anyway, so yeah, I don't know. So I think this episode was kind of like, alright, so it's kind of a sort of concept episode where it has, people and the ship start bursting out in anger and start attacking each other. And so when that played out, I'm like, yeah, that's a Star Trek thing. I don't think there was anything particularly interesting about that. And I did kind of think, I don't know, it's kind of a big deal that a Vulcan was crying during a concert, but I feel like that scene dragged out for too long, and I felt like it was kind of boring. But yes, it's weird that Sarek would be crying, but it seemed like everyone was making such overreacting to it, and making, oh my god, look, and they had the other guy going like this and leaning over like that, and being like, I don't know, it's something, I don't know, something didn't really work too well with me. But to be fair, the sort of screaming outburst, I thought that was an interesting concept. It was okay. The crew start yelling at each other, and I must admit the scene with the bar fight where they have Riker and Worf walking in, and Riker's like, it's my imagination or tension's pretty high on the ship lately, and Worf's like, I haven't noticed, and they walk in and there's a huge bar fight. That's a funny bit. I do like that. And the bar fight itself was kind of funny, but I don't know. It's just, I don't think there was that much there. It was just your typical. In fact, if I may be so bold, and I will be so bold, even though a lot of people might think I'm being crazy rather than bold, kind of like this better when it was done in Lower Decks. Now, granted, the reasoning for it being done in Lower Decks was a lot thinner and actually didn't make any sense. They acknowledge it didn't make sense, but that doesn't make it not make no sense. Anyway, so because if you're not aware, Lower Decks did an episode where they're kind of crossed their telepaths here because they had these Betazoid women on board, and so you think it's a reference to the DS9 episode Fascination, where Loaxin and Troy had a disease that was causing everyone to fall in love with each other and act out the emotions that she was feeling, and that's what they thought at first, but it turned out that actually wasn't the case. It wasn't the Betazoids, it was the Vulcan officer who was apparently had Bendai syndrome, and I was thinking of that line throughout this episode where it's like, well, you're Vulcan as fuck. You had the same disease as Spock's dad, and Spock's dad was Vulcan as fuck. And she's like, oh, but that is logical. If Spock's dad is Vulcan as fuck, then that must mean I am also Vulcan as fuck. They bleep out the word fuck, but you know that's what they're saying. But anyway, I liked the way that episode handled the emotional outburst. I thought it was more interesting. Honestly, having all the crew suddenly like doing the cha-cha, it was definitely more funny. But then again, Lower Decks is a comedy show, so of course it's going to be more funny. But I don't know. I kind of liked the way they handled the emotional outburst. Of the intrigue of it was more interesting, and the specific emotional outburst they have them doing the human period like half naked. I don't know. I kind of like that episode better than this one. I'm sorry. I feel like I need to apologize for that, but I kind of do. Anyway, so yeah, I will say the one scene that did really, really get me this time, that I was like, wow, this is a good scene. It did have me convinced it was a good episode, was when Picard confronted Sarek at first, and they were having the conversation. Sarek was being all Vulcan-like and being like, oh, I will listen to your supposition, Picard, even though I believe that you're in error. Ah, I see the flaw in your logic. You are misinterpreting my age overprotectiveness of me and interpret that as if something's wrong. But then Picard keeps like pushing him until he starts like yelling and screaming, and Picard's like, do I hear anger in your voice? And it's like, it'd be illogical for a Vulcan to show anger! Illogical! And that, not only was that a great Picard moment, that he was able to sort of outmaneuver Sarek in order to prove that he was in fact impaired, which he had to do. Because Sarek was in denial, and Picard it was his job at this point to make him face the horrible truth that he did not want to face, and I think he did a very logical job of doing so. But also, this is the scene I think that most serves the best as the Alzheimer analogy, that you really feel the weight that, Sarek is this great man. He's Spock's father, who's one of the Federation's best ambassadors, and he's this great man that everyone loves, and to see him fall apart like that is heartbreaking. Absolutely heartbreaking. And so I think the episode did its Alzheimer analogy really amazing with that scene. Another thing that should be noted, though, is Michael Piller and I believe several of the other writers involved in writing this episode talked about how the episode was kind of inspired by Gene Roddenberry and how he was starting to really be in decline, his health-wise, towards the end of season 3. Of course, he would die shortly after, sometime during the, I believe it was actually after season 4, but during season 4, Roddenberry wasn't really involved because his health was too serious. So, yeah, this is around the time his health was starting to decline, and they could see this, great man, a man that they really respected and, thought was inspiring, going through this decline in his mental health and physical health as well, but how much that took a toll and how difficult that was to watch, and they sort of injected that into this episode, which I hadn't realized that before, but it actually makes a lot of sense when you think about it. Now, there's also another scene that I noticed since I was paying close attention to this episode, as I do for these reviews. I did notice something I never noticed before that was a really nice touch. that the subtle sort of implications that something's wrong. Towards the start of the episode, when Sarek was reviewing the room that where they had that big tub of Kool-Aid or whatever. Ooh, yeah! that everyone was these aliens were gonna swim in or whatever, and Sarek was being really, picky and being like, this room is too bright, you must rip all the furniture from this room, blah, blah, blah. And the way he was saying it, you could tell he was getting agitated. He had anger, clear anger in his voice. It's like, these rooms are too bright, what are these things doing here? And then you have Saketh, his Vulcan assistant, walk up to him and was like, I believe we should let these men return to our work. And then immediately Sarek goes, yes, indeed, quite so. I shall let them. And he immediately calms down. Now this is great foreshadowing, and in retrospect makes perfect sense, because we learn that Saketh is trying to keep Sarek's emotions under control, that he's using his limited telepathic abilities, as he later says, but he's using his telepathic abilities to try to sort of contain Sarek's emotions. So that was a nice subtle call, because we see Sarek losing his temper, so he's obviously feeling emotions, and then Saketh steps up, says something calm and quietly, and then all of a sudden Sarek's calm and quiet, meaning he was telepathically trying to contain him in that moment, and succeeded. But as we see later in the episode, he is unable to completely contain him because of the wild stress on this mission. And you also see during the concert, when Sarek starts crying, that Saketh immediately looks over and is like, oh shit, he looks over at him and was like, oh damn, I'm not trying to control his emotions, I'm not working, it's not working, failure. And so those nice little subtle moments work. The moment when Saketh goes to the bridge and asks Data the extent of Counselor Troy's telepathic abilities, and then asks if how good Picard is negotiating and how could he take over for these negotiations, that was a bit more obvious. That was a bit more, something's definitely up. And I like how Data calls Saketh out on it later. In fact, is it logical to continue to lie? And calls him out on his logic, and he's like, tell your captain the mission's in grave danger. Yes, that was pretty great. That was pretty good. Did make me think it would have been interesting if they did use Troy, but yeah, Data was correct though in pointing out that Troy's not telepathic; she's empathic, because since she's only half Betazoid, so she wouldn't have the abilities to try to maintain Sarek. So let me stop beating around the bush and get into the biggest issue I have with this episode. And that's, and this is an issue I always had with this episode ever since the very first time I saw it when I was a teenager, to be fair. And I felt the same ever since then, throughout the decades, even up to today. The mind meld logic doesn't really makes sense to me, because it's inconsistent with how we've seen mind melds portrayed in previous episodes. And it's funny because I read this behind the scene thing that Ira Stephen Bear and Ronald D. Moore went and rewatched the scene from Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock, where Sarek mind melds with Kirk to try to get a better idea of how a mind meld would work, which is funny to me because this is nothing like how a mind meld would work. Usually a mind meld would work where they join minds, and so they're in physical contact with each other, and their minds are joined, and they're as one, so they're acting as if they're one person, as if both minds are the same, and they're able to recount events. And as soon as they remove the physical contact, this mind meld is ended, and they're no longer in contact. So how this mind meld works, not only do they continue to be in contact, their minds are still connected telepathically even long after the physical contact. Not only does the physical contact cease, they're in totally different parts of the ship. But let's just forgive that for the moment. Let's wave that away. Oh, maybe it's not necessary for them to actually touch his face. Maybe that's just part of the ritual. Maybe they don't have to be in physical contact the whole time. But how exactly does this work? Because they said, all other examples they said that we are one mind. They're both together. They both share the same mind. They're the same exact person. And Sarek even says that we will be of one mind. However, they're not of one mind, because Sarek is perfectly straight and in control, and Picard is freaking out, going, "No!" So why is it that the Sarek... I thought they were of one mind. Shouldn't they both be behaving exactly the same? Why is Sarek fine but Picard not fine? This seems very inconsistent logic. Now, granted, we don't know much about mind melds, and a lot of people, maybe this is a different type of mind meld, and maybe obviously I feel like a lot of audience who love this episode hand wave this away and are happy saying that, well, we just didn't see a mind meld like this before, or is it a different kind of mind meld? But I was never, for whatever reason, don't tell me why, I was never able to hand wave this away in my mind. Just subconsciously, something kept rejecting this. This just seems off. This doesn't seem right. Doesn't seem like how a mind meld should actually work. And moreover, why is it that... So Sarek is still behaving as Sarek in this moment. He knows who the Ligurians are. He, is behaving. He does say number one like the way Picard would, but overall he's still acting and behaving like Sarek. So then why is Picard completely acting like Sarek then? If Sarek's acting like Sarek, not Picard, but Picard is acting like Sarek and not Picard, how does that work again? I don't understand. So let's follow the logic of this episode. So Sarek said that the mind meld would cause Picard to get these unfettered, powerful emotions that he wouldn't be able to control. And his, human discipline is not strong enough to control Sarek's emotions. So, first question, why doesn't he mind meld with Saketh then? Of course, I know the real answer. The real answer is that Saketh is not the main cast member of the show. That's Picard. And it's Patrick Stewart. Obviously, we had to have Patrick Stewart doing his acting. But anyway, but yeah, that would seem to make a lot more sense that it would be Saketh, since he does have the Vulcan discipline. He's already good at suppressing Vulcan emotions. So it seems like he would be able to handle Sarek's emotions better. And wouldn't Sarek have a stronger discipline of controlling his emotions with Saketh as opposed to Picard, who is not a Vulcan? Just asking. And for that matter, why not Troy? Because she is empathic in nature. Her whole job is dealing with emotions and controlling emotions, so it seems like she would also be a much better choice than Picard. Saying. Now, second question I got, how come Picard is just feeling Sarek's emotion and not his own emotions? It seems to me that it would have been more logical if Picard was losing his, feeling his own personal emotions more strongly, because so he would inherit Sarek's, out of control emotions, but related to himself rather than Sarek, if you know what I'm saying. Instead of crying for Spock and Amanda and Perrin, he should be crying for the people that Picard cares about, not the people that Sarek cares about. I know what you're going to say. You're going to say, well, their minds are linked, so he's feeling what Sarek feels. But yeah, I remind you to what I said earlier, that Sarek is still acting like Sarek. So why is Picard acting like Sarek and not Picard? I think Picard should be acting like Picard, but with the emotions out of control. That would have made more sense to me. I don't know. People might disagree with me because they're just used to what the episode's telling them. But that's fine. You can disagree, but this is how I see it, and it's how I will always see it. Yeah, and so I actually thought it would have been more interesting, as a matter of fact, if Picard was confessing his love for Beverly in this movie. That Sarek's his out of control emotions caused him to confess his true feelings. And to me, that would have been a fuck ton more interesting than just Picard yelling about Sarek. And so that's why I never really liked this scene. It felt kind of, I don't know, inaccurate, I suppose. It felt kind of contrived, dare I say, a little bit. And I know that this is Picard or Patrick Stewart really doing his acting, and he does a good job, to be fair. I just don't buy the sincerity of the scene itself. I don't buy how it's written. And I don't know, I think it is a little too much, to be fair. I think Patrick Stewart has much, much better performances in TNG. Chain of Command Part 2 immediately comes to mind. Inner Light comes to mind. I think there's other examples where Patrick Stewart gives a much better performance. Not saying this is a bad one, but it is a bit over the top sometimes. Particularly, I always used to repeat and quote this scene mockingly. I think I used to do this to my ex-wife when, there's the line where he has when I do love you. I used to say that to her sometimes, and she would get irritated with me. She's like, "Oh, shut up." She knew I was quoting this episode, though. but that seemed kind of fake. How it's I love you. I know it's the Alzheimer analogy, and I get it, and part of that is sincere, but I can't help but feel that's silly. The way he overdoes it. But I will tell you what did make me laugh was the promo for this episode. So I'm watching it on Blu-rays, and apparently the Blu-rays, if you don't know, they have the promo that originally aired, on next Star Trek, The Next Generation. So they have the promo that originally aired, and they seem way more, the promos are way more outdated than the episodes themselves. They use these cheesy, star wipes that go whoosh. But anyway, this promo actually had me laughing after watching it, because it was like, on the next Star Trek, a famed Vulcan ambassador comes on the Enterprise, and he's losing his mind, and Picard must risk his life to help save him. And they immediately cut to Picard screaming, "No!" It's like, Picard must risk his life. No! I don't know why, but something about that I found hilarious. I just started laughing hilariously at that. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying this is a bad scene. I'm not saying the whole scene is comically bad, but it is a little too over the top for me. I guess part of my main issue with it is, as I mentioned, the logic behind it, which I don't really feel like it's consistent with how mind melds should actually operate. I'm thinking of Harrison Ford and Force Awakens saying, "That's not how the Force works." Something in my brain is king. That's not how a mind meld works. But anyway, you could, I'm sure 1,000 people are going to disagree with me, and that's fine. You go right ahead and disagree with me, but it's not going to change my mind. This is really how I see the episode. And so, here's the thing. When I look at this episode from a structural standpoint, it feels like the ending's a bit anticlimactic, because I feel like the real ending of the episode is the scene where, as I said, the great scene, my favorite scene in the episode, when Picard confronts Sarek and he's illogical, but after that, they're all depressed because, we have to cancel the mission, this is sad. And then Perrin goes to Picard and actually, we could do this mind meld. And so they do the mind meld. Picard screams, "No!" And then the day is saved and everything's fine, everything goes back to normal. There was no real real threat. There was no real conundrum. There's nothing really happened. It's just they did a mind meld. Picard freaked out. Everything's fine. It didn't seem like a real resolution to the episode, at least to me. And by the way, Sarek's not fine. He still has the disease, and he's going to go on to decay, so it's kind of a downer ending, but realistic. Considering the analogy they were going for. So, I mean, in that sense it works, but I don't know. Like, I don't think it's bad. I don't think it's terrible. Don't get me wrong, but I don't know. To me, it's not that interesting of an ending. It's kind of just a conclusion that just happens. But I will say, one good thing I will say about that scene, though, is I like the Crusher was the one that comforted Picard. And I like the chemistry between them. I thought Gates McFadden did a damn good job in that scene. And again, it makes me wish that they played off these two more as a couple. I feel like season 3, they did kind of, season 1 and season 3 actually did kind of touch on it. Gates McFadden will insist that season 3 they totally scrapped the Picard Crusher chemistry, but I disagree. I think that would be season 4 where they do that. I think you or maybe not season 4. I don't know. Maybe season 5. I'm not sure. But because I think they do touch on, like, they touch on it a little bit in Remember Me, but I don't know if they do any other time in season 4. I don't know. We'll see when I go through season 4. But I'm finding like episodes like this and Allegiance and High Ground. You do see a bit of Picard and Crusher chemistry and Evolution. I don't know. It seems like they got something going. But I mean, by the time we get to season 6, it's more of a buddies having breakfast together. But here it seems a bit more than that. And I do wish that they explored that a bit more. Always get sad about that. Instead, it happens off-screen in between Nemesis and Picard Season 3. Hooray. Anyway, gotta talk about Wesley and Geordi. And I fucking love this scene when it's all the screaming and the yelling, and Geordi is like, a good book is all the action you'll get, and then Wesley releases the best zinger ever. And he says, well, at least I don't have to go to the holodeck to find my women. And I was just like, damn, Wesley, God, hitting for the jugular. Now, how Wesley would know that Geordi had a relationship with Leah Brahms in the holodeck, that I don't know. I can guess, though. Here's my guess. My guess is Geordi told him. I think that's a logical guess. I think it's not too far-fetched that, Geordi was explaining what happened, told Wesley about what happened, maybe over drinks in 10-4, he just mentioned it offhand, and Wesley, being the dick, was using that against him. Now, I know they were under the Vulcan mind control thingy, Majagger, but that was a fucking zinger. I watched another review where they said, no, this kind of argument, the kind of shit that they're saying to each other here, like, they never can come back from that. Like, how could their friendship is dead after that? Now, obviously, they do get over it because everything resets at the end of every episode. But again, I can headcanon this away to say they were able to move past it because they were both being fucking Vulcan mind controlled. They were being controlled by the Bendai syndrome or whatever. So they were probably just like, let's never talk about that ever again. Anyway, okay, so now, engage. Now I would like to very much thank my Patreon supporters for supporting me on Patreon. Very much appreciate it. Thank you guys so much. As I said, really helps the channel continue. I'm very inspired, very thankful, very grateful for everyone's support. So I'll give a quick shout out to Antarius, Tatson, Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky Menegester, Joel Lavals, Alessandro Michelisio, Norman Buchwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, Allison Fordyce, and Brandon Neal Howells. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So next we'll get into a couple patron comments on this episode. First comment is from Kyrie091, who says, Sarek, more like shades of Nay. Edit. Nothing rhymes with Sarek. Edit number 2. Oh, wait. Sarek, more like Star Trek. I say that because this is actually a pretty darn good episode. It's legit Trek. Well, there you go. Saving grace, because Shades of Nay was not a very good rhyme for Sarek. Anyway, next comment is from Norman Buchwald, who says, not counting the McCoy cameo, this was the first time a TOS character was fully acknowledged, but the main part of the TNG story, and boy was it done well. In fact, Sarek was the catalyst of a popular big mystery on the ship, and where the Naked Now was similar and failed because we hardly knew the characters then, this was definitely successful and worked beautifully. Of course, we got a call back to this recently in Lower Decks, which was genius, but reintroducing us to Sarek, introducing the degenerative condition where emotions can have impact, the introduction of Sarek's new human wife, the mind meld between him and Picard, which would be called back later, and through Picard, and wonderfully acted by Patrick Stewart, the conveyance of Sarek's love for his son Spock was fantastic. This is always an episode I'm eager to rewatch, and this one does have stiff competition with other great shows from this season. 10 Beverly Crusher slaps on Wesley's face out of 10. Yeah, how can I not even mention Beverly slapping Wesley? That was another great moment in the show. Anyway, don't talk back to me. Anyway, next comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, the acting from Patrick Stewart and Mark Leonard elevates this episode for me. Sarek losing his ability to balance his emotions, which is so intriguing. Maybe you can explain in your review why the hell did they approach this like an episode of The Simpsons. When I saw the scene in 10 Forward, The Simpsons came to mind. Even when Geordi and Wesley were arguing, I was hoping that Geordi would say this at the end of the scene, "Stupid Flanders." Oh, I mean Wesley. My rating is 8 short stories about Springfield out of 10. I gotta be honest, I don't really see I don't know what you're talking about specifically about The Simpsons. I suppose you're talking about how The Simpsons, like, yell at each other and like feud and argue and fight all the time for no reason. Maybe that's what you mean in an episode of The Simpsons, because maybe they just start yelling at each other for no reason. I don't know. I think that's what you're getting at. Either way, I don't really see the connection, if I'm being honest. But that's just me. I thought the episode in season 3 that was most like The Simpsons was Sons of the Father, because that starts off with one plot and completely turns into a totally different episode halfway through the episode. That's the Simpsons episode. But here, I guess you're talking about, them yelling at each other, I suppose. Anyway, next comment is from Brandon Neal Howes, who says, whenever I see that Sarek is married to another Earth woman, the phrase "Earth girls are easy" slips quickly through my mind. I have never seen a mind meld like this before. It is reminiscent of Turnabout Intruder, but better done, of course. Picard letting out all Sarek's suppressed emotions is Patrick Stewart's finest acting in TNG to date. I'm sorry that we didn't get to see Sarek negotiating with the Ligarians. I wanted to see what they looked like in 150 Celsius slime baths. How the fuck does Wesley know about Geordi's relationship with the hologram of Leah Brahms? 8 brawls and 10 forward out of 10. Well, I already gave my thoughts on how Wesley knew. Geordi told him. That's total guess, total theory. Could be wrong, but to me that fits. And I think the reason why we didn't see what the Ligarians looked like was simply budget. The Benjamins. They didn't have the money. And how, I don't think, plus it would mean they would have to put into practice, like why they need to sit in this slime, and I think whatever they would come up with would be disappointing. It's better to just not show them. Personally. And, I've also addressed my feelings about how I think, well, you said best acting to date, so that doesn't include Inner Light and Chain of Command Part 2 because those come later. So, yeah, okay. I can buy this. This is Patrick Stewart's finest acting to date. Although, I don't know. I think his singing, study, boys, study, and Alicia's, because food is all can't eat. I don't know. And even his acting in Survivors is more subtle, but I think to hear it, I don't know, it's just a tad bit overacting for me. Not William Shatner or Avery Brooks levels, don't get me wrong, but just a little bit too much. Just my humble opinion. Anyway, thank you, patrons, very much for your comments. So my rating for Sarek out of 10 is going to be a 7. Very good. Now, to be honest, I was split between a 7 and an 8, but talking through this and realizing some of the contrivances and mistakes, I'm going to bring it down to a 7, and I stand by my stance that this is an overrated episode. It wasn't high enough for me to put in my overrated top 10, because I don't think it's that overrated, but yeah, I think people do. I always see people like point out, oh, this is one of the best episodes of season 3, and they always go to it and say, oh, this is a great episode, where I'm just like, it is alright. Like, I guess I just have too many issues with the mind meld, even though I know everyone and their mother's going to disagree with me. But Brandon even himself pointed out that they had never seen the mind meld work like this before. And I guess many people were fine with that. For whatever reason, I wasn't. As I said, it wasn't a deal breaker because I still liked that episode. I think they make a good analogy with Alzheimer's. And I think the scene where Picard confronts Sarek and he freaks out was a great scene. But yeah, the whole plot with the whole crew yelling at each other, like, it was fine, but I didn't see anything particularly, like, that would elevate it to the level of amazing for me. And, oh yeah, by the way, the concert scene where Data is, like, the main event, he's the main attraction, he's the main violinist, and earlier in the season, though, we were told that Data lacks soul, so why is he the main event now? Anyway, so that is it for my review of Sarek. So coming up next on my channel, if I will just bring up the schedule, let's see, where am I? Okay, so Thursday I will be doing a Patreon requested video for the Measure of a Man extended version review. So yeah, I'll be covering that on my channel. And then on Saturday, another TNG episode review with Menage Troy. And then on Monday, another new review for TNG with Transfigurations. So that's what's coming up on my channel, so be sure to check it out as I continue to cover Star Trek The Next Generation, as well as many more videos on Star Trek and other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.